this part of our tutorial, we're going to introduce Boolean variables in iOS. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare and initialize some Booleans by giving them values and then changing them after we explain exactly what a Boolean is. Then we're going to use the example of an isLoggedIn Boolean to demonstrate where Booleans may be used in a real-life situation. This part of our tutorial will deal with variables of the type Boolean. These are variables that can take on only one of two values. They can be true or they can be false. Now in some languages the compiler interprets these as a 1 or a 0, but for now all we need to know is that they can contain either the words true or false. So let's write out a couple of examples. So these are variables of type Boolean or bool, and let's call this one is true. We'll give it the value of true, and we'll create another one called is false, and we'll give that the value of false. Now notice how the words kind of turn this turquoise kind of color. This is because these are the only two options for a Boolean. So in Xamarin Studio, numbers become kind of an orange color, and strings are also an orange color, but Boolean values, true or false, are in this kind of a turquoise color. Now what we can do is we can take these variables and we can reassign them down here if we'd like. So let's start off just by printing off these values to see what happens. So we're going to run this through our simulator here rather than printing out to the console, because this is just keeping in mind the idea behind app development. We may as well make an app and run it. So if we change our label.text, so we'll have it take in the value of is true, and what we want to do is turn this to string, because the label type can only take in strings and output strings. It will complain if we try to feed it a Boolean value or numbers or anything that's not a string. So all we're doing here is we're taking our Boolean is true and we're converting it to a string, and we're feeding that into the text of LBL labels. So when we run our app, it should just print our text, which will be the Boolean value. So we'll right click on variables. This is variables tutorial.ios. We're going to scroll down to run with, and we'll do the iPhone 5. So here we're getting the warning that this one isn't used, and that's true, we're not doing anything with it, but we will in just a little bit here. So just ignore this warning for now. Alright, and we get the value of true being printed out, because that's the value we've assigned to is true, and we are printing out here. So we can do the same thing with false, is false if we want. So let's change this to is false, and we'll stop running that. We'll save this and we'll run it again. And now we're not using is true, so we get the warning here. Again, just ignore this, it's not a problem. And we get false being printed out. Now I'm kind of tired of seeing these warnings, so I'm going to take one of these out and we'll try and input a number and see what happens. So this is no longer is false, this should be is true. So let's see what happens when we try to feed it a number rather than a true or false value. So we'll stop this from running and we will run this again. So now we're getting an error, and this error is saying the constant value 1 cannot be converted to a Boolean. And that is true because 1 is an integer, which we'll talk about a little later, and is true can only take in Boolean values. It can only take in true or false. Now what we can do is we can also reassign values to these variables. So if we have a Boolean here, is true, and we're giving it the value true again, and if we want, we can change it down here, so we can say is true equals false, and here we are just reassigning the value of isTrue to be false instead of true. So now we'll get this label to contain this again, and we will right click there and run it. Let's see if our value actually changed to false. Just waiting for this to load, and there we go. We get a false being printed out. Now Booleans are again very useful for representing a true or false state. So you'll see this a lot in games and apps where you have to log in to access something. So we might have a variable is logged in, and this could be perhaps false to start off with, and then we'll do something in the code, like we'll enter in our username and password, and then we'll change the variable is logged in to true, and that will allow us to access a lot of stuff. So yeah, you'll see this very often in games where, again, it'll start off being false, you'll log in, so the variable is logged in gets changed to true, and then that allows you to access basically your account or anything else. So that's a very common occurrence where Booleans can come in very handy. This part of our tutorial introduced the Boolean type variable. So to recap, these are variables that can take on only a true or false value, but the value can be changed from true to false or from false to true depending on what value we need the variable to take. So again, these are very useful for representing variables with only two possible states, true or false. So these variables could be something like an isLoggedIn variable, which will only allow you to access your account if the isLoggedIn variable is true, and will lock you out of your account if this variable is false.